Broadcasting from the basement of La Penta, it's WICR.
Generally, you shouldn't be a advocate of losing, and that's across all walks of sports, but I think sometimes in rare situations you have to advocate losing because that's the only way you're going to wake up and understand the disastrous situation that you're in. And that is exactly where the Indianapolis Colts find themselves right now. Welcome back to the Sports Vault, everyone. Jersey Joe Archino back here, and I think it'd be an understatement to say that the Colts season can be summed up in one word: disappointing so far. But it really is a culmination, and it's been leading up to this. It really has. I mean, if you look at this roster, since Andrew Luck came into the NFL, it's basically the same quality as it was when he came in. It's not substantially better. The offensive line is not substantially better. There is not a running game behind him. He doesn't have the talent to throw the ball to, and on defense, they've never really improved. And I think that's starting to really come into fruition now more than ever. And I talk about this all the time, and the Colts aren't the only franchise that are guilty of doing this because it's happened before. But sometimes when you get your hands on a player that's this transcendent, that's this talented, it fools you. It happened to the Cavs with LeBron James, and you have this player, and you have holes everywhere, but that player is so good that it hides all of those weaknesses, and I think Luck's first couple seasons, he was able to do that. But after the offensive line, and we know the way the NFL works, the more hits you take, the less of a chance you have to have a long career. And I think right now, Luck, the hits keep coming more and more and more. I mean, you just look at this past Sunday night where they lost to the Texans. The Texans rally and come from behind and win that game. That game went to overtime, obviously, but in the last 2 minutes of that game into the overtime, you could just see very easily Andrew Luck is just against the world. He is carrying the brunt of a franchise on his back. The offensive line is not giving him help. He does not have a running game. He does not have great receivers to get the ball to. Now, I think he's made a lot of those receivers what they are. Obviously, T.Y. Hilton is a guy a lot of people want to point fingers at, and I do think he's got talent. But I think Luck makes up that talent. I think if T.Y. Hilton was on any other team in the NFL, you would really see a dramatic decrease in his effectiveness. He's a product of Andrew Luck. When we've seen all these great quarterbacks have an ability to make all these big names, to turn guys into big names. We saw Peyton Manning do with the likes of guys like Jacob Tamme, Dallas Clark. Clark was a good, tough player, but Peyton Manning made Dallas Clark. Peyton Manning made guys like Jacob Tamme who they are. And I think you look across all the transcendent quarterbacks we've ever seen, and it's a similar thing. But that loss to the Texans kind of just continues to sum up the state of the Colts right now. I mean, I think it didn't help them, obviously, that they played the game in England against the Jaguars. They lose. Then they come home and they play the Bears in a very tough game. They win it, but not convincingly. And then right after this, they have to play the Texans on the road. They have a lead, and they can't get it done. There are three areas when you look at the Colts, and they're just glaringly obvious. They're poorly coached, they're poorly managed, and they have a bad roster. All three of those things are glaringly obvious to anyone. You don't need to be an NFL GM to see that. You don't have to watch football for 20 years to see that. Any fan who watches the NFL on Sundays can see the glaring weaknesses with the Colts. And it's very easy to see why Andrew Luck has so much talent. But it's so even easier to understand why that talent isn't winning the Colts games anymore. Because when it comes down to it, you can only put him out there so long without getting protected. And it's one thing, and I think we see this sometimes too, is when you have a player that talented, to waste that talent, there's nothing more frustrating to a fan base. I don't think there's anything more disappointing than seeing a player of that caliber in having his talent wasted like that. The Cavaliers wasted LeBron James' talent for years, and then he left. They paid the price for never surrounding him with a good head coach or a good enough roster to compete with. And he took that team as far as he possibly could, and then he left. Obviously, Luck, it's a little bit of a different situation. He signed a big deal heading into the season, but this is football, and it's much more different. And I think you just look at the last drafts for the Colts under Ryan Grigson, name me the last standout player he's been able to draft. And again, I've been critical of Pagano, and I hate to be because I think he's a really good guy. I think his story is great. The way he fought back, the way that he showed toughness, and he never gave up from his illness. I think there's so many things to admire about Pagano and his strength and his courage. But to me, he's just not a good football coach. You could see very easily that this team's not organized. When they play against other good coaches, they're poorly outcoached. And it's, again, I use that word over and over and over again, but it's glaring. It really is so easy to see what the problems are for the Colts. And we stay in their division for a minute. The Tennessee Titans are in a situation now where they're growing and they're young, but Marcus Mariota has been tremendous. The Jaguars have been very up and down this season, but they have a very young core. And the Texans, I think, again, Osweiler is still proving himself. His first year there, but that's a very good roster in Houston. When you compare the rosters of the teams in the AFC, we know who the worst teams are. It's the Dolphins, it's the Browns. The Colts, if you stack up their roster with the Dolphins or with the Browns, I mean, maybe not the Dolphins, but they're not too far off from the Cleveland Browns, and the Browns are obviously in a whole different universe. But to have that level of uncertainty, it speaks volumes about where the franchise is. And I think I was the one, and not just myself, but many people really were puzzled in the offseason when they decided to bring back Pagano and bring back Grigson. Now, the two of them didn't have a good relationship. They just didn't. I mean, we know that now, hearing things that the two of them did not get along. And if you didn't get along then, when things were going a little bit better, why in the world or how in the world are you going to get along now when this thing is really imploding around you? I think an organized head coach who really has his wits about him and has his tactics figured out and brings a level of play calling and organization to the table would make such a difference for this team. And I think at the rate the Colts are going at right now, obviously, there's going to be changes, and the GM is just as responsible. The Colts really need a strong GM, and they need a organized head coach and someone would take that job right in a heartbeat. The Colts are a great organization. I mean, people right now kind of beat up on the Colts organization, and I've talked to people around the NFL when I've covered the Giants, and people really say how well that organization treats the media and treats other people. I just think sometimes you struggle, and we've seen it around different sports, you struggle putting the right people in place when it comes to coaching your team or drafting for your team. And that's where the Colts are now. I don't think that organization is a mess by any means. I think it's a very well-run organization with an owner who cares very deeply about his team. But I think where they do dramatically need to improve and wake up is just changing everything, overhauling this whole roster. There's one player on this team that can't be touched. Every other spot, I think there's room for improvement. And I think that all starts with bringing in a new GM and bringing in a new head coach. And the way we've seen the season go right now, I don't think anyone would argue with me, or any Colts fans would argue with that right now. And it's more than anything is, you look at Luck and you say, well, look, he's still young. He's still got time. And that's true. But time is something that's a very dangerous game to play with, because we've heard that said so many times, he's got all the time in the world left, and then at the end of the day, the time ends, and then you've never done anything. I think it's a situation where it could very well happen to the Colts before you know it, but it can be changed. But the change has to come from the managing side of things and from the head coaching side of things. They're not going to get better until those two things change. And I think Sunday night was the ultimate tipping point, which just proved that. And again, I've been in this station and I've made so many of these different types of things where I've talked about the Colts and the problems, and I've seen this building year after year after year. I still contend that the best year Andrew Luck had was his rookie year. Maybe not statistically, but when I look at what Bruce Arians did there that year, that just showed you what Luck could do with an organized head coach. It really did. I think that right there proved the ultimate difference. But we will just have to wait and see if this little wake-up call will do what the Colts need it to do for them. Until the next time, Jersey Joe Archino here with the Sports Vault. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Archino and on Instagram, Jersey_Joe_Archino. And I'll catch everybody in the next episode.